Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space, 10.14 a toy. We are back.
Do you get it? It's a pun because his name's a toy.
Yeah.
But now he's a toy.
Well, that was live
A
editing.
long while ago. Remember when these used to open with like how many days before
The new
skipper
moon.
kidnapping?
36 hours until the new moon. Well,
A
it's
good
not
while
changed.
ago.
It's not changed since then. So
I see. A good while ago. Volte Kojiro looked on in horror, hand grasping at empty air, as Mariana Panhelios' body hit the floor. She'd run her sword through her own chest, all the way through, the blade protruding from her back. Blood spilled freely over the floor, mingling with Negan's. He screamed. It was a hoarse, desperate sound, bouncing off the walls of the training arena. This wasn't what was meant to have happened. He hadn't meant to kill him, never kill him, just beat him. Just show that they were equals, that they'd always been equals. 2 steps back, and then Volte Kojiro emptied his stomach on the floor. How had things ended like this? This was a disgrace. No. His gaze drifted to the device in his hand, the trigger that had activated the toxic pellets he'd slipped into Negan's drink that morning. When Negan's attacks had become overwhelming, he'd click that trigger and... No, that wasn't what the device was. There was no way that was the purpose of the device. Volte wouldn't have done such a thing. He wouldn't have betrayed his friend like that. He was an honorable warrior of the supremacy. He was stronger than that, damn it. He didn't need to use cowardly tricks like that. That was a goddamn lie. And yet the thing was in his hand. He hurled it out of sight and memory, choosing to look instead at the sight of his victory. Yes, victory. He had to believe that. That was the most important thing. If he doubted himself, he was done. He'd beaten Negan Rush. He'd beaten Negan Rush in a fair duel. He was the best swordsman in the Supremacy. That was fact. That was undeniable fact. He wouldn't allow anyone to deny it. Volte Kojiro told himself that again and again in the cold room, so many times that he thought he'd go crazy. In reality, of course, it was only a few seconds, but that cogitant brain of his was going into overdrive, desperately trying to hold Volte's fracturing psyche back together. It didn't take. No matter how much he lied to himself, the truth remained unblemished in his memory. No matter how much he obscured the memory, the guilt continued to rest in his chest. No matter how much he ignored the guilt, he could feel the blood on his hands. Volte fell to his knees, looking down at Leviathan. At some point, he dropped the blade, and now its uneven green surface looked back up at him. The slightest scratch, perhaps across the chest, and death would be quick. Would that not be better than living? Would that not be better than living with this? I think you want to remove the comma after better.
sure.
Slowly, with shaking hands, Volte Kojiro reached out to pick up the sword, and Negan Rush took the shortest, shallowest breath. Volte gaped down at the body on the floor, at the blood dribbling from the mouth. He wasn't dead? How the hell? He'd run the man through on his sword, his poison sword, and he was still breathing? He hadn't even beaten him? Volte shook, pulled between frustration and panic, and an awful, awful idea began to crawl into his head. Present day. A toy Muzazi felt numb as he spoke. That's a lie, he whispered, clutching the hilt of the destroyed luminescence with all his might. Shut your mouth. Volte shook his head, looking down at him. It isn't a lie. You are Negan Rush. You just don't remember, but that'll soon fix itself. Muzazi shook his head, looking down at him. Muzazi shook his head, stumbling back, his feet unsteady on the floor. That isn't true, he shouted. His ability has infected me, true, but there is no such ability. Volte's voice was merciless and calm, each syllable like a dagger in Muzazi's heart. You don't have any powers like that, Negan. Everything you have you devote to swinging the sword. Muzazi put a hand to his head. It was killing him, and gritted his teeth. That is not my name, he cried. It is, Volte said, walking forward steadily, driving Muzazi back. You were on the verge of death when I made the decision to save you, Negan. My friends at the Absurd Weapons Lab were able to get you back on your feet, but you were little more than a hollow shell. You were no good like that. I needed my rival back. You were always the only one worthy of my consideration, Negan. Muzazi went to take another step back, and fell back, right into the cold jacuzzi in the middle of the floor. Spluttering for breath, he dragged himself out, water dripping from his hair and clothes, as he looked up at Volte standing on the edge of the installation. The other man seemed to tower above, like a god looking down at his creation. That's a lie, Muzazi wheezed weakly. In what way is it a lie? Volte's expression did not so much as twitch. Do you perhaps have memories that conflict with what I'm telling you? Muzazi scrounged in his brain, reaching for the recollections that he knew would prove this man wrong, only to find nothing. "I have a life," he insisted all the same. "I have a past. My name is Atoy Muzazi." It did not ring true. Balte's gaze was dark. "What past is that?" he said, relentless. "Tell me about it. What was your family like? Who were your friends? What were your fears, your hopes? What makes you cringe when you try to sleep at night? What brings a smile to your face from back then? Can you name even one thing?" He knelt down, looking Muzazi in the eye. "Anything you have, Atoy Muzazi," he said quietly, "is only what we gave you. When I saved you, you were little more than a puppet, a doll, a toy. Empty. Gretchen had to give you that damn sword just to give you some memories, some form of consciousness, enough to stop your mind from caving in on itself anyway." Muzazi shook his head frantically, the water clinging to him and making every movement heavy. Hollow breaths ran up and down his throat. He could feel a perilous burning at the back of his eyeballs, but no more words of denial could find their way to his lips. They were fruitless. Balte lashed out with a hand, seizing Muzazi by the hair and pulling him halfway out of the water. "I let you call yourself Atoy Muzazi. I let you go free so you'd be ready to take up your sword again, to finish our duel. I let you run around, playing at being weak." The cogitant's face was a mask of utter focus. The cogitant's eyes stared with such intensity, Muzazi almost felt like he'd burst into flames. The cogitant's mouth moved and spoke more cool and honest words. "But it's time to wake up now, Nigen." The pain in Muzazi's head reached a crescendo, so much so that he couldn't even hear his own screaming. His vision flared, his arms fell limp, his thoughts ground to a halt and stopped. Balte frowned. The eyes that looked back up at him were dead and empty, just as they'd been so long ago. Atoy Muzazi's chest rose and fell with his breathing, but there was nobody home. This was just another living doll he was holding. "Damn it," Balte muttered. His grip loosened, and the thing called Atoy Muzazi dropped back down into the water, sinking down, making no effort to rescue itself. Everything was white. A vast plain of white, the product of a bleached mind. There was no horizon because there was no distance, and there was no distance because there was no existence. This was a place of consciousness alone, the last retreat for a psyche under assault. Muzazi floated there, bodiless and thoughtless, until it occurred to him that he needed to breathe. In order to breathe, he needed form, and quickly found it. He dropped onto the white ground, panting for breath, collapsing onto his hands and knees. This was not happening. He knew that this was not happening. The air he felt as if he was breathing was nothing but an illusion. But any illusion was better than reality right now. The words that Balte had spoken crawled out again, and his mind repelled them, trying desperately to deny what had been said, to deny what horrifyingly seemed to make just the tiniest bit of sense, but it couldn't be. There was no way. He was Atoy Muzazi, special officer of the Supremacy. His life was his own. He wasn't just someone else. Atoy Muzazi looked up. "What do you want?" he mumbled, his voice a croak. Sound came into existence to facilitate speech. Nigen Rush was in his usual garb, golden war robes and that damn helmet, with a sword sheathed at his side. As Muzazi rose to his feet, distance came into existence for the purpose of separating the two figures. For a long time, Rush just silently regarded his counterpart. Then, he reached up and removed his helmet. Muzazi watched, eyes dull, wishing that he could be surprised. In some far-off corner of his heart, he had hoped that the face behind that helmet would be bizarre in some way, someone that couldn't possibly be him. Perhaps someone else he knew, and this was some shocking reveal. But no, he saw what he'd expected, deep down. His hair was short and white, and his features might have been slightly different, but those gray eyes were unmistakable. Atoy Muzazi was looking at himself. Nigen Rush was looking at himself. Time and surgeries had left their mark, but this was two of the same person. "Your nobility," Muzazi admitted. "No spectre choosing me as your champion. Just me, remembering myself. Just you, slowly coming back. That's right, isn't it?" For a moment, Muzazi thought his counterpart would just be silent again. But no. "That's right," Nigen Rush replied, his voice so soft. "Gretchen Hale's weapons can contain memories. Morgan Noct told you that. Do you remember?" Muzazi nodded grimly. "Yes," he sighed. The two swords called luminescence were her creations, the one destroyed on Panacea and the one destroyed just now. Their purpose was to imprint a toy Muzazi upon our empty shell. Once they were destroyed, the remnants of your former life began to return, shattered and incoherent as they were. That is what I am, the corpse of your memories. And now you're coming back, Muzazi said numbly. There's no more need for me. Nigen Rush frowned, an expression Muzazi had seen in a mirror 1,000 times. Is that what you want? It doesn't matter what I want, Muzazi said, squeezing his fists and pressing them against his temples. I don't want anything! How could I? I don't exist! Nigen Rush began to walk forward, growing larger as he did, and Muzazi could feel himself diminishing in the process, becoming less, fading away. He looked down at his hands and saw them flaking away like leaves, skin abandoning his body to reveal blood and muscle and bone. He would disappear soon, and Nigen Rush would appear again. If a life like this could be said to have a purpose, he would have fulfilled it. Nigen Rush spoke as he walked. None of it was real, then? Muzazi shook his head, looking down at the white abyss. His hands were gone, and he could see his wrists starting to fade as well. Bone protruded from the stumps, but even that was cracking and disintegrating. A false face falling away. If you still have a mouth, Nigen Rush snapped with uncharacteristic aggression, then use it! Was none of it real? Oh, Muzazi whispered. No, it wasn't. He felt something, the sense of touch becoming extant in that moment. The barrel of a stun pistol pressing against his back, the warming warmth of a stun shot, ready to be fired. What about this? Dragon Hadrian asked from behind him, his voice echoing insistently. The anger you felt at my betrayal, the drive you had to track me down, was that not real? No, Muzazi said, it wasn't. Anything I felt back then was because I was made to feel like that, filled with false memories and sent to dance. A thing like me can't feel real anger. The sensation faded, and Nigen Rush continued to approach. Muzazi glanced to the side and saw Jean Lion standing there, grinning maliciously. His hands were covered with blood. What about this? The dead man asked. The righteous indignation you felt when I made you go against your ideals. The resolve you had to defeat me. Was that not real? No, Muzazi said, it wasn't. Those ideals weren't mine in the first place. The whole thing was a joke. His arms had vanished up to his elbows. Nigen Rush stopped in front of Muzazi, looking down at him as big as the world. His face was expressionless, his gray eyes impassive. Slowly he reached down and seized Muzazi by the collar, pulling him up. Muzazi squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a deep breath. Fine. At least with this, there could be no more lies. What about the time we spent together? Asked Marie. The things we saw and felt? Were they not real? Muzazi did not intend to move before that moment. Before he heard those words, before he remembered the two of them kneeling in the snow, he had truly intended to give up. He had wanted to disappear utterly from this world and leave the falsehoods behind. But all the same, in that moment, he moved. He opened his eyes and saw what he had done. He had rammed the stumps of his arms forward right into Nigen Rush's chest, the broken ends of his bones skewering the swordsman's heart. Slowly, fearing what he would see, a toy Muzazi looked up. Nigen Rush was smiling down at him. Even as blood trickled from the edges of his mouth, he smiled at Muzazi. Thank goodness, they said softly, and bled into one another. Balte's mind broiled as he walked away, squeezing Leviathan so tightly it felt as if he'd crushed the hilt. It was okay, everything was still okay. He'd just get Gretchen to make another luminescence and they could try again. Negan would come back in the end. In the end, Negan would come back to finish their duel. He took a deep breath, looking up at the air, who was pressing herself against the wall, trying to get as far away from him as possible. There was always the chance she'd write about what she'd heard here. He had to shut her up, if nothing else. Balte took a step forward and splash! Whirled around, a grin of excitement on his face. The swordsman had leapt out of the water, liquid cascading off his sodden limbs and robes. He was perched right on the edge of the jacuzzi, breathing heavily, recovering from the time he'd been submerged. His face was down, long black hair falling around it, but now a streak of familiar white ran through those locks. Negan! Balte cried, only for his excitement to die as he looked closer at what he was seeing. The warrior had dropped the hilt of his sword in his pool, abandoning it. Instead, blades of white light had erupted from his palms, stinging Balte's eyes where he looked too close at them. The man looked up, and those gray eyes looked at Balte with utter rage. Balte narrowed his eyes. Nigen Rush doesn't use an ability like that, he said coldly. No, replied a toy Muzazi, special officer of the Supremacy. He doesn't. I cried a little bit.
I heard you. I'm glad.
Yeah. At first I was act crying for the role, and then I started real crying when Marie came up.
Oh, I'm glad I got you.
That was good. Wow. Good chapter. Let's go 10.15! I'm excited. So there's two things in this world. Of course, you have to give us lore, but you promised last time that you would draw Nigen Rush's
I did not draw it. I tried to draw it, but it was really bad.
Well, you should still post it anyway, like you promised so many years ago.
I promise we shared that day.
Oh, man. What a chapter. Peak fiction. Everyone who doesn't read Aetheral Space is fucking stupid. It's the best. I'm typing as we speak in the chat. 10.15. About to go so hard tomorrow. Let him know. Alright, give me my lore now.
Okay, lore. Do you have any questions? Any topics? Any categories?
This isn't the lore question, but I do have a side question.
Okay.
If Negan's the one who, subdued Marie, how did Marie not recognize him in Muzazi? I know his hair was, short and white.
They have slightly different facial features, because, surgeries and stuff.
Oh. I have a question.
Okay.
What was the last thing Nigen Rush thought before he went white? Before he, went doll mode?
Disappointment.
Oh. I think it's cool that he didn't want Muzazi to disappear. They've merged. Now he's a toy Muzazi, but with all the powers of Nigen Rush. Yeah, just like Gutsu! Muzazi and Guts. Oh my god.
You don't need luminescence. You've got your radiance, Muzazi. You realised the power was inside you all along.
What a character arc. Ruth could never.
Don't count Ruth out yet. There's stuff going on in the future for Ruth.
Muzazi has brought this... Wait, by the way, this is 10.14.
Yeah.
10.14. This Aetheral Space has officially entered peak tier. This is the scene that should get all the fan art, that should get the fan animation, that gets you the call from Penguin Publishers, that gets fucking UFO Table on the phone, hey, so we wanted to talk to you about an OVA. Oh my god, the Aetheral Space OVA, can you imagine?
It's like the JoJo OVA, but it's like...
Yeah! Oh my god. Alright. Well, enough gushing. You get it. You fucking know I think you're a good writer. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye!
Bye!